In 2007, the world was completely turned upside down with the release of the Apple iPhone. All of a sudden, smartphones were adopted by a much larger population of consumers who were able to surf the web, check emails, and of course, make calls, all from one device which could fit into their pocket. Today we are still seeing the short-term effects of this revolutionary device as it is becoming increasingly rarer to find phones which even have buttons instead of a touchscreen. In the course of just over a decade, the iPhone was able to not only control the cell phone market, but spur a movement in innovation which has brought the world closer together than it has ever been before. However, it could be said that this movement was part of a much larger period of innovation which began over 160 years prior to the iPhone's launch. What hath God wrought? These were the famous words which were typed out in a series of dots and dashes from the U.S. Capitol to a train station in Baltimore, Maryland on May 24, 1844. These 4 words sparked a period of advances in telecommunication which brought people from all over the world closer together at a frantic pace. The electric telegraph, invented by Samuel Morse, Joseph Henry, and Alfred Vail, used the power of electrical currents in order to send signals across vast networks of wires, which, within just a decade after its famous debut, had begun to crisscross the American landscape and would even make its way across the Atlantic Ocean, creating near-instant communication between 2 separate countries for the first time. By today's standards, the telegraph seems relatively simple in design. A current of electricity, which was created through a battery, would be turned on and off in a pattern which identified letters and numbers. This pattern became known as Morse code. The simplicity of the design is what made the electric telegraph a success, as it was relatively easy to duplicate and was simple enough to cross several miles with very few technical issues. Throughout its years, the telegraph would mainly be used by railroad depots, newspaper outlets, and government offices to transmit messages both personal and public. The device saw its first true test throughout the Civil War, as both sides made use of the telegraph in order to facilitate communications between top officials in war departments and field officers in the midst of battle. This allowed for greater oversight and better planning of troop movements throughout the war. By the mid-1870s, the telegraph was largely in use throughout the eastern United States, and had certainly made its way into Cleveland County, which hosted a variety of telegraph offices in each of its townships. The telegraph allowed for the people of Cleveland County to communicate with relatives and friends all over the country, and helped the growing cotton industry to stay up to date on crop prices and other industry news. The telegraph would continue to be a major part of life in Cleveland County into the early part of the 20th century, but would quickly be overshadowed by another technological innovation which allowed for the transmission of the human voice for the first time. Unlike the debut of the telegraph, the first use of the telephone was certainly less poetic. The first phone call in history occurred on March 10, 1876, when Alexander Graham Bell made a call to his assistant in another room, saying, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." From that day forward, history was changed again as the invention of the telephone altered the entire way humans communicated from that point forward. Bell's invention used a wire connected to a membrane to turn the vibrations from speaking into an electrical message, which was passed along to another membrane which repeated the message on the other end. The telephone would undergo several changes before it came to Cleveland County just 14 years later. According to available sources, the first telephone exchange in Cleveland County was put in place in Delight, which is just north of Polkville, in the year 1890. This exchange was later followed by others which were placed in Lawndale, Toluca, Polkville, and Falston. At the turn of the century, there were a series of mutually owned cooperative exchanges throughout Cleveland County, which charged a small fee to be connected to the system. In those days, in order to make a call, one had to first turn a crank, activating the large zinc battery in the phone box, which would let the operator at the phone exchange know that you wished to make a call. The operator would then connect you to the number you desire through a switchboard, which was a central device at the phone exchange which the switch operator controlled and made connections between parties via a wire system. In smaller townships, or exchanges that serviced a smaller number of customers, many switchboard operators worked in their homes, That way they were made available 24/7 and overhead costs were lower. At that time, there were far fewer phone line customers and even fewer reasons to call on someone, so the operator most likely wasn't very busy. In the early days of the phone in Cleveland County, many neighbors would be on the same number known as a party line. The neighbors were able to distinguish who the incoming call was for based on individual rings. Once on the phone, your neighbors had the ability to listen in on the call if they wished, which probably led to a lot of town gossip in those days. Although Cleveland County was usually seen as progressive in terms of phone technology, it wouldn't see its first major boom in telephones till the early 1950s, when the Southern Bell Telephone Company moved into the county and bought out smaller phone services. With Southern Bell came new technologies and an increased service area. It was at this time that Cleveland County had around 10,000 phone connections, or roughly one connection for every 6 residents in the county. Early historians mark this period as a time when Cleveland County became North Carolina's best telephone county. Since this time, we have seen the advent of newer and newer ways of telecommunication, and today not only are we able to communicate by voice, but also by video. No longer are we dependent on large boxes attached by wires. Now we are able to carry an entire computer in our pockets. Although it is important to embrace these new advances and changes in technology, it is equally important to take a look back at where we started and marvel at how rapidly change occurs. The items from the Cleveland County Historical Collection allow us to do just that.